think we're going to wait a few moments for those outside of the glass doors to rejoin us. Please continue eating and enjoying your meal. And again, my name is Garrett Grady Lovelace. I'm professor here at School of International Service, American University, and we're delighted to have you join us for the day, this epic farm bill journey of a day. Our program continues, and next up we have another keynote. And joining us we have Dan Imhoff. Let me get my remarks here. So Dan Imhoff, 5 years ago, we had a 2012 Farm Bill Symposium. As it turned out, the Farm Bill did not go through till 2014. So the 2018 Farm Bill Symposium that we're in the middle of now could be a little bit presumptuous. It might not undergo until 2019. But Dan was our keynote then as well, and so we're delighted to have him join us again. Dan is a researcher, author, and independent publisher. He's the author of multiple books about the food system, including Food Fight, The Citizen's Guide to the Next Food and Farm Bill, and this epic coffee table book about CAFOs, industrial factory farming, which is not what many people have on their coffee table, but it's wonderfully researched, and it won the Nautilus 2011 Gold Prize for Investigative Reporting on Industrial Factory Farms. He's the president and co-founder of Watershed Media, a nonprofit publishing house in California, and president and co-founder of Wild Farm Alliance, a 10-year-old national organization working to promote agricultural systems that support and accommodate wild nature. Please welcome Dan Imhoff.
Thank you, Garrett. Everybody can hear me? Yeah. Well, thanks everybody who organized this conference and got me out here. I was asked by Nina 3 basic questions. Why did I write Food Fight? What are communications ideas for students who are just starting to get their feet wet on this issue, and what are some opportunities for universities? Before I go too far, how do I advance slides? Do I just push like that? Okay, good. All right, there we go. I'm going to talk generally for some prepared remarks, and then I'll go over some examples of communications that I've done around the Farm Bill quickly. Why did I write it? I was at a Kellogg conference in Sacramento, and I was in this hotel room, and it was full of unbelievable wonky language and so many acronyms I had never heard before. And it was 2006 in the wintertime, and I left this room thinking, this is really important, but it's a complete parallel universe, and someone has to popularly translate this for the average person. And for some crazy reason, I volunteered. I had investigated conservation programs for a book called Farming with the Wild, and it was a really excellent experience going all over the country looking at instances where conservation biologists were working with landowners. They were trying to knit together big contiguous areas, keep land out of production. I thought, what an amazing idea that we would pay landowners to actually keep land in habitat rather than plow it up and poison it with chemicals. And so I started this humble process of really cracking the code of what is the Farm Bill, what are all these titles, what were its history. That very first book came out in early 2007, and the 2000 Farm Bill became the 2008 bill, but I made about 50 or 60 talks over that time, and it seemed like it had kind of served this purpose of demystifying something so important to people who are really interested in food and agriculture. But my main message, I think, to the people who are out there communicating about this Farm Bill is, as a writer, as a communicator, it's a really great subject, because it's like you pull the string and you find the whole world attached to this string. So there's a lot of material. You've got to really, put yourself in a certain mental state in order to open yourself up to it. And no matter how technical and how bureaucratic it gets, though, we have to get back to this basic principle, which is the Farm Bill is $100 billion that we spend every year And it's our chance, it's an amazing opportunity to shape the world, to do things better, to compensate for values and costs that the market does not recognize. And when we consider what to do, and we're looking at a new 5-year plan, I think it's important to just remember the important outcomes that we all share, which is protecting the natural world while we farm, providing health and sustenance, especially to the most needy, leading the world by example and commitment to conservation and stewardship, creating a culture that values farmers, workers, and vibrant rural communities, and promoting research and innovation in fairness and health. But if we turn the Farm Bill on its head and we looked at it out 50 years from now, like the Land Institute has done a very seminal study, what if we looked at the Farm Bill in a 50-year plan on where we want to go? And that would be roughly 50 years from our last big shape-shifting policy where we were telling farmers to get big or get out, and we got millions and millions of family farms off the land, and we have this hourglass system that Patty Lavera spoke about in the last session. And so what we're really thinking is these farm bills are these 5-year increments where we're investing in a new kind of food system. So one idea here that we could think about is if you're too big, get out. Okay, we need every cent of the $100 billion. And it's time to have real limits on income eligibility for crop insurance and price supports rather than open checkbooks to the biggest operators that tragically distort our markets. The Dust Bowl, the Great Depression that spawned early Farm Bill programs should never be far from our minds. Conservation programs and requirements were once the cornerstone of farm policy, and they've slowly eroded away. And if you were going to enroll in a farm program, you had to have a conservation and a habitat plan, and that has really gone by the wayside. So our second tenet could be no subsidization without social obligation. That is, if we're going to create a taxpayer-funded safety net for farmers, and I'm not against it, at least we should get something very, very valuable in return. And for me, I keep going back to those conservative values of conservation, minimal soil erosion, maximum clean air and water leaving farms, including some of the biological pollutants that Rob Martin just talked about, biodiversity protection at the highest levels. Over the next 50 years, these programs should foster the transition from the fossil fuel mine, the fossil fuel monoculture farm, to the agro-ecological diversified farm. And so we can't really move forward in this 50-year, how are we going to pass something really healthy to our kids with the system that we've had for the last 50 years. It's sort of like this idea that the president is going to bring the jobs back to coal country. It's not going to happen. We have to go forward with a different plan. The so-called alternative agriculture of the present, diversified organic operations, grass-pastured and humanely raised livestock operations, will lead our food system into this next 50 years. There'll be 2 generations, new farmers, 10 farm bills, to consistently and expand things like rotational grazing systems, no-till organic farming, perennial polycultures, crops that provide new ways to raise grains, oil seeds, energy, fibers that protect the soil with deep-rooted plants and slowly take over tens and then hundreds of millions of acres. And they'll replace the dueling banjos of chemically drenched corn and soybeans that now blanket our continent. Our conservation incentives should be impressive and far-reaching. And we learned in the first session this morning that the Conservation Reserve Program could be expanded. The problem of agriculture that the Farm Bill has been trying to solve for the last almost 100 years is overproduction. And no matter how much money we throw at this overproduction, prices still rise and fall, and suddenly we're in a bust period after we've totally busted all this agriculture that never should have been put into production in the first place. And the Conservation Reserve Program, it is at least a system to try to mitigate that. And so we could have 10% of the land always in conservation reserve. It would be up to 40 million acres. Imagine if we started to incorporate cover crops and really get away from these synthetic nitrogen fertilizers that have far-reaching impacts far away from the farm fields where they're applied. We could have 10 and then 25 and 50 and then 100% of farms that are incorporating cover crops, which we know are economically effective and ecologically effective as well. Measurable gains in soil carbon, soil organic matter, could be rewarded as we give true value to one of humanity's truly non-renewable resources, which is the soil. There must be a cultural shift at USDA from away from feeding the world with industrial agriculture to leading the world with knowledge and practices that can be locally applied, locally adapted, so that we can feed ourselves and teach others to feed ourselves without destroying the planet. A labor title in the Farm Bill could offer support to nearly 6 million farm workers that right now aren't really factored into the policies and programs of this important legislation. A transparency title could be used to uphold labeling and production information systems that teach consumers about the real costs and realities of production. An urban agriculture title could support inner city food production. I live in a small town in Northern California, and there's a lot of food being produced in this tiny town. There are oranges that are just everywhere, all over. They're falling all over the street. And there are olives that are never picked. There's huge opportunities for this urban-rural food production expansion. An animal husbandry title could replace the livestock title that we have right now and move away from concentrated, grain-fed, highly drug-dependent animal agriculture toward more interconnected grazing, animal health, local processing, fair market type animal production. I would personally like to see an end to the animal damage control program. Spends $100 million each year to trap and poison and attempt to eradicate species like coyotes, mountain lions, wolves, bears, red-winged blackbirds. And it could be replaced by a species restoration and predator coexistence program as we look forward in this 50-year plan. And just for the cherry on top, our dietary and nutrition requirements could reach some kind of parity in the crops that we're trying to incentivize with the nutrition guidelines that we're trying to achieve. As I said, one of the beautiful things about the Farm Bill is that it has an amazing amount of material. So I just want to very quickly go through how in the last book, which was really geared toward the 2014 Farm Bill, I approached some communication challenges. This is how the Farm Bill spends a tax dollar. So you can look at that $100 bill, at that $100 billion budget, and turn it into a dollar bill, and you can see that over that 12 years from 2002 to 2012, about 73 cents of the dollar was going to nutrition. And about 20 cents was going for crop insurance. That left about 6 cents, crop insurance and commodities, that left 6 cents for conservation and 1 cent for everything else. It was a slide like this that I presented in 2007 that really inspired a very successful program to look at SNAP dollars and try to figure out how we could get improved healthy food access to low-income citizens. You can go to history. One of the first acts of the Kennedy administration was to reinstitute the food stamp program after he had been on the campaign trail and just saw real destitute conditions in rural areas. Or, we can look again, historically, we can use data to show what kinds of trends have we seen. We had 6 million family farms at about the time of the Great Depression, and about 2 million farms by the year 2000. Or you can try to make light of a very tragic situation. What happens when they make the Farm Bill is they make a lot of promises And then in the annual appropriations program, a lot of those promises are broken. When it comes to the Farm Bill, whenever they need more dollars for commodity programs and big agriculture, they usually make what's called a chimp in the conservation programs. That's a change in mandatory program spending. And you can see that historically, year after year after year, they're just raiding our conservation budgets, which is really what we truly get back in order to pay out and support big agriculture. This is a project that I've just recently launched called Reality Check. You can use industry's own terms and then try to put some pictures with their terms. So they call this a lagoon. This is an excavated pit containing millions of gallons of untreated animal waste adjacent to a food production site. It's really a cesspool, and that's being very kind. Or they'll say, you know, this is a hen house. Well, this is actually a house with, it could be up to 1 million chickens spending their entire lives in a cage in a space smaller than an iPad as an egg-laying slave, or a hen penitentiary. Or you could just go to the USDA website and get some data from them. This was on the USDA website at the time of the last Farm Bill, and the big red dots represent people getting over $250,000 a year, and this is a map of Manhattan. You can talk about economic policy. Again, Patty Levera talked about concentration and the CR, the concentration ratio. Big food markets are considered highly concentrated if the share controlled by the top 4 producers exceeds 20%, and very highly concentrated, basically monopolies, if the share approaches or exceeds 50%. And then you see the 50% line, and just about every single segment of the food industry, this is Heffernan and Hendrickson from 2005, is highly concentrated and monopoly controlled. You can appeal to taxpayers' sense of responsibility or lack thereof, lack of control. Again, what we heard this morning from Kathleen Merrigan was that, well, okay, this is debt, and these are still figures from my last book, but you can see how the deficits just began to, we had a few years of surplus there under the Clinton administration, and then the debts really started to kick in, and under the Obama administration with the financial meltdown of 2008, we saw a huge escalation in spending. You also saw a huge escalation in SNAP enrollment through both Bush and Obama. And to be fair, and we should be fair in our communications, the ag budget is only about 0.1% of the total budget. So that was what it was explained to us this morning. Again, you can say, where is this money going? This is all the subsidies that go to concentrated animal feeding operations that aren't really calculated into the cost of big meat and animal products that we pay. You can show some irony. So the My Plate says this is what we're supposed to eat, but if you look at the ag subsidy plate, you see that really what we're supporting is hardly any vegetables or fruits at all, and mainly big meat and dairy and grain output. You can look to the future. What's going to happen to this critical conservation reserve program when all the contracts begin to expire? What's going to happen with this land that provides habitat, sequesters carbon, provides open space, and creates some kind of rural beauty in our agricultural landscapes? We can look forward, like the 50-year Farm Bill from the Land Institute does, to a time when we go to a very, very different type of permanent agriculture and away from growing annual crops as our primary way of feeding ourselves. You can use maps like this one that shows where food deserts are distributed throughout the area, our country. And then you can use maps that show complete absurdity. This is over a 20-year period, EWG collected this data where these places, every dot represents a place that got disaster payments in 11 of the last 21 years. So that's basically permanent disaster. And that's basically the root of the crop insurance program that we have today. So just in closing, we can use our communication skills and our research skills here in the university and out in the broader world to create a new narrative of food production. And we can show pictures because it's highly needed, and it's highly needed that our representatives really hear about the type of agriculture and food system that we want. Just in closing, there are a lot of excellent platforms to key in, thanks to the amazing work by the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, by Food and Water Watch, by the National Family Farm Coalition. Many of the people here were very, very far away from that 2006 meeting that I had that inspired a couple of the Farm Bill books that I've written, and yet we're still very much in the same place. So I wish you great organizing and communicating and activism around this next Farm Bill.
Thank you so much, Dan. Now if I could invite the practicum students from this year's practicum. Well, yes, I can. Let me get PowerPoint. All right. So 5 years ago, we had Dan give comparable remarks, and it's interesting how not much has changed, though a lot has changed in the current political administration. And we gathered in one room like we have right now, a whole set of diverse stakeholders across sectors, across disciplines, across civil society. And at that moment, I had the honor of meeting two people. Many people, but two people I ended up working with very closely, and that is Lorette Picciano of the Rural Coalition and Kathy Ozer of the National Family Farm Coalition. And it quickly dawned on me that these two coalitions, representing respective expansive, diverse networks of growers, farmers, farm workers across the country, were fonts of wisdom and experience and knowledge. And through my initial meeting with Kathy and Lorette, I got to meet Rudy Arredondo on the front row, Ben Burkett, who is somewhere in the room, who are going to be on the rural development panels, Michael Johnson, who was on the conservation panel this morning, and many other extraordinary community leaders and farmers and organizers with those coalitions. And so we began a partnership of research. We went to the next one. And the research project was Rural Coalition at their annual meetings, which we hosted in this room, would culminate their meetings with research needs. And the team of grad students and I would begin the process of trying to do qualitative or quantitative research to meet some of the research needs of Rural Coalition. We move on to the next one. And National Family Farm Coalition. And so for 5 years, since 2013, we have done qualitative work for them, program assessment, some documentary shorts, some literature reviews, some economic databases. And with National Family Farm Coalition, we've got students looking at the history of family farm justice movements, on international impacts on trade and domestic impacts of imports after NAFTA. We did kind of historical policy analysis of various farm bills throughout the history from the 30s. And all of these are on the website, farmbillfairness.org. And so it's been an extraordinary learning opportunity for the students, and hopefully provided some good deliverables for our community partners. And it's been an amazing opportunity and honor for me to work with Lorette and also Kathy Ozer, who tragically died a month and a half ago. And actually this whole gathering is really, in large part, bittersweet for me, because she was a mentor and a colleague and a friend for myself and for many other people in this room. So here she is thinking through the impacts of TPP with international and domestic allies and partners, and her obituary in the Washington Post kind of summarized what a leader she was, and what a thought leader and what a tireless advocate she was for families and family farm workers around the country and around the world. So here's a few shots of some of the events in this long-standing and very enriching and inspiring collaboration research project that we're working on, all based on participatory action research. and community-based and even community-led research, which is our goal. And so we have a few other slides, and at that I will pass on the mic to this year's practicum students.
Hi, so I'm Jennifer Mlechko and this is John Malik, and we're 2 of the 9 members of our practicum team led under our amazing professor. And you have Felicia in the back and Colton. They've been working the event, and then I think Stephanie is here also in Madison. They're waving their hands somewhere. So our practicum research is kind of divided into 3 parts. We have a terms of engagement. Part of it is a literature review, but another part of it is this principles of partnership. So academic research historically has been largely extractive, so we're working closely with our community partners to ensure that the research that we do benefits them and also make sure that they accomplish the things that they're trying to accomplish. And we're particularly trying to develop a framework, protocol, or kind of best practices in doing this kind of academic research with community partners.
So the second main component, or the briefing paper number 1, is largely how national and international policies, specifically with the Farm Bill, are affecting farmers themselves. So whether it's international trade policy or crop insurance policies that are ever changing, or formally supply management, how they affect farmers themselves. So our group specifically took a trip out to Iowa and spoke with farmers and interviewed them and other members of the National Family Farm Coalition to see kind of how their lives have changed with each successive farm bill and which policies changing have affected their specific operations, their families, and their rural communities.
And so there's another group that went to Oklahoma, and we explored several of these kind of different ideas that have already been talked about, mainly involved with conservation. So we talked about the problem of U.S. diversity, and on top of that, climate change is going to affect each region differently. So we're thinking about this idea of adaptive policy and if it even has a place in U.S. policy and in the next Farm Bill. We've seen that it is likely that historically underserved farmers are likely to bear the brunt of climate change economically and ecologically. So we're coming up with these resource concern maps using GIS, looking at climate change impacts, socioeconomic indicators, as well as program funding and where it's actually going and if it's going where it's needed to go. And involved with Oklahoma in these issues, we're particularly looking at the red cedar case study. Red cedar is an invasive species that is a problem in the Midwest and Great Plains. But there's some really great promising mitigation strategies that could help both the farmer and conservation. And then we're also looking at the definition of and understanding of agroecology, so exploring agroecology's adaptation within the context of U.S. ag and research, and focusing on the relevance of the term along with similar concepts to our community partners and the farmers that they work with. And these are just some pictures of Iowa and Oklahoma. And obviously these issues are really complicated, but we're lucky to have a ton of experts in these issues here. So if anyone has any ideas or concerns or opinions, please find us and share. Thank you.
And then meanwhile, our other partner for this organization, for this event, is Berkeley Food Institute.
I'll be really quick because I'm sure everyone wants to get up and stretch a little bit. We're about to go into the next session. I just wanted to welcome, we have 11 Berkeley students who have come out here, 10 graduate students and 1 undergrad. If you could just raise your hand, please, all of our Berkeley scholars, and give them a big hand. We won't do a presentation because we're really excited that they're interdisciplinary from almost all of our partner schools. Berkeley Food Institute was established as a partnership between the College of Natural Resources, Public Health, Public Policy, Law, and Journalism at Berkeley. And since then, actually, we've added the College of Environmental Design and the School of Business. So we have almost all those schools represented, and I'm really excited that they can meet each other, can be here. Please seek them out, and you may be working together in the future, I hope. So thank you again for coming and for supporting their work and their scholarship.